What did the doctor see in my surgery that scared him to death? I went in for a routine gallbladder removal and woke up to the recovery room nurse backing away from my bed with her hand over her mouth. She dropped her clipboard and practically ran out of the room when I asked if everything went okay. Nobody would tell me what happened during the surgery, but I could hear urgent whispering in the hallway. The surgeon never came to check on me after the procedure, which was strange because he'd promised to update me as soon as I woke up. When I asked for him, the nurses kept saying he was busy with other patients, but I could see him through the door, just standing at the nurses' station staring at nothing. He looked like he'd seen something that had broken his understanding of the world. They discharged me 2 hours early without the normal post-op instructions. The nurse left my discharge papers on the bedside table and backed out of the room without ever getting close to me. When I asked about follow-up appointments, she said they'd call me, but I could tell from her voice that they wouldn't. My stomach churned with more than just post-surgery nausea. I never got a call, so I tried calling the surgeon's office myself, but they kept saying he was unavailable. After a week of trying, I drove to the hospital for answers, but security stopped me at the entrance. They had my photo at the desk and said I was permanently barred from the premises. When I demanded to know why, they just said it was a medical decision and escorted me to my car. The surgical site was healing fine, but I needed the follow-up care to make sure everything was normal inside. I made an appointment with a different doctor across town, but when I got there, the receptionist looked at her computer and her face went white. She excused herself and came back with the doctor, who said they couldn't treat me and I needed to leave immediately. This happened at 4 different clinics. I called my insurance company to complain, and the representative put me on hold for 20 minutes. When she came back, she said my account had been flagged with some kind of code she'd never seen before. She couldn't tell me what it meant, but said no doctor in their network would be able to see me. My hands were shaking as I hung up, because I realized I'd been blacklisted from medical care. My friend, who worked as a nurse at a different hospital, tried to look up my records for me. She called me an hour later and said she couldn't talk about what she'd found, but I should consider leaving the country. When I pressed her for details, she said there was a note in my file that she'd never seen before in 15 years of nursing. She wouldn't say what it said, but told me never to contact her again. I hired a lawyer to get my medical records, but he called me after reviewing them and dropped me as a client, but not before suggesting I get my affairs in order. Though he wouldn't explain why, the fear in his voice made my skin crawl. I started feeling fine physically, but the psychological toll was destroying me. I couldn't sleep wondering what they'd seen inside me during that surgery. I kept checking my incisions, but they looked like normal healing wounds. 3 months passed, and I'd been turned away from every medical facility within 100 miles. Even veterinarians wouldn't see me. A dentist took one look at my chart and asked me to leave. I was completely cut off from any form of medical care, and nobody would tell me why. I found out that one of the surgical nurses had quit immediately after my operation and moved to another state. I tracked her down and called her, but when she heard my voice, she started crying. She said she couldn't tell me what they'd found, because she'd signed something, but that I should enjoy whatever time I had left. She hung up before I could ask what that meant. My insurance company sent me a letter saying they were terminating my coverage with no explanation. My employer got a call from someone, and suddenly, I was being let go for restructuring, despite perfect performance reviews. Everyone who'd been involved in my care was systematically cutting me out of their systems. I felt like I was being erased from society. I finally found a med student who needed money and was willing to hack into the hospital system for me. He said the surgical video was stored on a separate server, but he could get it for the right price. I paid him everything I had in savings and waited for 3 days while he worked on breaking through the security. He sent me the file with a message saying he hadn't watched it and didn't want to know what was on it. He said after seeing the security level on this particular file, he was leaving the country and suggested I do the same. The video was labeled with my name and a code that just said, "Category unknown, containment protocol initiated." I sat at my computer for an hour before finally clicking on the file. The video was 43 minutes long, and my cursor hovered over the play button while my heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I had to know what they'd seen inside me, even if it destroyed my life to find out. I took a deep breath and clicked play. The screen filled with the bright lights of an operating room, and there I was on the table with my stomach open and the surgical team working on me. The surgeon was talking into his headset about the steps he was taking, while a nurse mentioned her kid's soccer game that weekend. Another person asked about lunch plans, and someone else complained about the parking situation at the hospital. For 6 whole minutes it looked like any other surgery video, with tools moving in and out of frame, and my insides looking pink and normal. The surgeon kept narrating what he was doing with the gallbladder and explaining each cut and movement for the recording. Then, at exactly 7 minutes and 12 seconds, everything changed when the surgeon stopped talking mid-word and leaned forward toward the monitor. He asked the nurse to move the camera left and zoom in on something near my liver that caught his attention. His voice went from casual teaching mode to confused questioning as he pointed at what looked like a small pouch sewn into the tissue. The pouch wasn't supposed to be there, and you could hear the confusion spreading through the room as everyone tried to figure out what they were looking at. The surgeon used forceps to carefully open the stitched pouch, while the whole room went dead silent, except for the beeping monitors. Inside the pouch was this small metal thing about the size of a vitamin pill with tiny wires coming off it, and what looked like a barcode or tracking tag. Someone in the background whispered those exact words that still make me sick to remember. The surgeon immediately told everyone to stop talking, and the whole energy in the room shifted from confusion to something closer to fear. The scrub nurse's voice was shaking when she said they needed to call risk management right away, which made no sense for finding a foreign object. The camera jerked as someone left to make the call, and I could see the device sitting in a metal tray looking like some kind of tracking equipment from a spy movie. 20 minutes into the video, a new voice entered the room, and it wasn't another doctor, but someone administrative who started giving orders. This person told them to bag the device immediately and stop recording anything except what was legally required for the procedure. They mentioned something about category unknown protocol, and everyone seemed to know what that meant, except for one nurse who asked what was happening. The administrator told her she'd be briefed separately and to just focus on closing me up while they handled the situation. Then I heard them say something about the device matching a research serial number from their inventory, which made my whole body go cold. The video went black for about 10 seconds before coming back on, and I noticed several people who were in the room before were now gone. The last 15 minutes showed them sewing me up in almost complete silence, with the surgeon's hands visibly shaking as he worked. Someone mentioned they needed to document everything for legal, instead of for my medical record, which explained why my file was so weird. The video ended at exactly 43 minutes with no summary or post-op notes like you'd normally see in a surgical recording. I sat there staring at the black screen for what felt like forever, trying to understand what I'd just watched. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely move the mouse as the reality hit me that they'd found some kind of research device inside me. Whatever that thing was, it had been put there on purpose and was never supposed to be discovered during a routine surgery. I immediately started making copies of the video file onto every USB drive I could find in my apartment. Then I uploaded encrypted versions to 3 different cloud services using fake accounts I created with VPN protection. The paranoia was overwhelming, but I knew someone might try to delete this evidence if they found out I had it. I kept thinking about that research serial number comment and what it meant that the device was in their inventory. Had someone at the hospital put this thing inside me during a previous procedure without my knowledge or consent? The thought made me want to throw up, but I forced myself to stay focused on protecting the evidence. I grabbed my phone and called Meg again, even though she'd told me never to contact her after our last conversation. She didn't answer, so I left a voicemail telling her I'd seen the video and knew about the device they found. I said I understood why she quit, and that I wasn't angry, but needed to know if there were others like me. Within an hour, she texted back with just one line telling me to never contact her again, and that she'd already said too much. Her fear came through even in that short text, and I realized whatever this was went way deeper than just one bad surgery. The device, the cover-up, the systematic blacklisting from medical care all pointed to something organized and deliberate. I was part of some kind of unauthorized research program, and now that they knew I knew, things were probably going to get worse. That night I couldn't close my eyes without seeing that metal thing from the video sitting in the surgical tray. I kept lifting my shirt and running my fingers over the healing cuts on my stomach. The stitches were almost dissolved, but I pressed on the skin around them looking for any weird lumps or hard spots. Every little twinge or ache made me jump up and check the mirror to see if something was moving under my skin. I turned on every light in my apartment and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad writing down everything that had happened since the surgery. First was the nurse backing away from my bed with her hand over her mouth. Then the surgeon who wouldn't come see me and just stood at the nurse's station looking broken. The early discharge without instructions came next on my list. I wrote down every clinic that turned me away and the exact dates I went to each one. The insurance company call was on March 15th at 2 in the afternoon. My friend who worked as a nurse called me back on March 20th and told me never to contact her again. The lawyer dropped me as a client on April 2nd. I filled 12 pages with dates and names and every single thing I could remember about being cut off from medical care. If something bad happened to me, I wanted someone to find this and know what they did. I opened my laptop and started searching for anything about category unknown protocol, but Google gave me nothing useful. The regular medical sites had nothing about it, and even the government health databases came up empty. I found some sketchy forums where people talked about weird medical stuff and typed in different search terms. One thread mentioned patients getting blacklisted after routine surgeries at certain hospitals. Another post talked about finding strange objects during operations that weren't supposed to be there. The people writing seemed scared and used fake names, but their stories sounded a lot like mine. Nobody had solid proof, though, and most of the posts were old or had been deleted. I spent hours going through medical whistleblower sites and found 3 different people claiming their hospitals were doing research without telling patients. They mentioned implants and monitoring devices, but the details were all really vague. One person said they quit nursing after seeing something during surgery that made them question everything about modern medicine. I took screenshots of every post that seemed connected to what happened to me. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen, but I kept searching until I found a journalist named Ruby Lindsay who wrote about medical corruption. She had exposed a drug company for hiding bad test results and won some big journalism award for it. Her email was listed on her publication's website with a note about sending tips through encrypted channels. I downloaded a secure email program and spent an hour figuring out how to use it properly. I wrote her a message explaining everything that had happened since my surgery and how I'd been blacklisted from all medical care. I attached a 30-second clip from the surgical video showing them finding the device, but not the whole thing in case someone intercepted the email. I told her I was desperate and needed someone to help me understand what was happening. 2 days passed before she wrote back with just a few sentences saying she needed to verify I was real. She said there were a lot of crazy people who sent her conspiracy theories and she had to be careful. She suggested we meet at the Westfield Mall food court on Saturday at noon, where there would be lots of people around. I got there 20 minutes early and bought a coffee just to have something to do with my hands while I waited. She showed up right on time wearing jeans and a baseball cap and sat down across from me without ordering anything. I opened my laptop and showed her the timeline I'd written and all the documentation I'd collected. She read through everything without saying much, and then I played more of the surgical video with the sound turned down. Her face changed completely when she saw them pull that device out of the pouch near my liver. She watched it 3 times and then looked at the screenshots from the whistleblower forums. She finally said this was real and she wanted to help, but we had to be really careful about how we did this. She explained that the hospital could sue me for stealing their video and try to ruin my life even more than they already had. She said we needed more proof than just the video to show they did something wrong. She took pictures of my documentation with her phone and said she'd start looking into the hospital's research programs. She gave me a different encrypted email address and told me to only contact her through that from now on. 3 days after meeting Ruby, I got a message from the med student who'd helped me get the video. He was using a different email address, and the message was short, but it scared me bad. He said someone was tracking who had accessed the surgical video server, and they were trying to trace his hack. He was leaving for Europe tomorrow, and said I should be really careful, because they were looking for me too. The paranoia got so much worse after that, and I started backing up everything to multiple places. I uploaded the video to 5 different cloud services using fake accounts and VPN connections to hide my location. I bought a bunch of USB drives and made copies to hide around my apartment, and even mailed one to myself at a P.O. box I rented with cash. Then I set up something I'd read about online called a dead man's switch. If I didn't log into a special website every 48 hours, it would automatically send the video and all my documentation to 20 different news outlets and government agencies. The website cost money, but I figured staying alive was worth maxing out my credit card. I decided to try one more time to get medical care and drove 8 hours to a clinic 2 states over that advertised they took cash payments. The waiting room was full of people without insurance, and I paid the $100 fee up front. The receptionist took my information and said the doctor would see me soon. 5 minutes later, she came back looking confused and said there was a problem with their system. She made a phone call to what she said was tech support, but I heard her reading my name and birth date to someone. Her face got weird, and she hung up and told me I needed to leave immediately. She said they couldn't treat me, and when I asked why, she just kept saying I had to go right now. Even a cash clinic in another state knew not to help me, and that meant the blacklist was in some kind of national database that every medical place could access. Ruby emailed me 3 days later with a name and address for a doctor who might help. Dr. Hans Oakley was a semi-retired internist who worked out of his home office and only took cash payments from patients who couldn't use regular medical channels. She said he'd helped other people who got blacklisted for different reasons, and he wouldn't ask too many questions about why I couldn't go to normal doctors. I called the number she gave me and left a message explaining my situation without giving too many details. He called back that night and said he'd see me, but I had to follow his rules exactly. No insurance forms, no paper trail, cash only, and I couldn't tell anyone where his office was located. The drive to his place took 6 hours, and I had to be really careful about how I traveled. I took back roads to avoid toll booths with cameras and paid cash for gas at stations without security cameras facing the pumps. I stopped at a motel halfway there that still took cash and didn't require ID if you paid extra. The whole thing felt crazy, but I needed medical care, and this was my only option. His home office was in a regular neighborhood and looked like any other house from the outside. He answered the door himself and led me to a converted garage where he had basic medical equipment set up. He examined me for over an hour, checking my surgical sites and asking about symptoms I'd been having. He drew blood himself and gave me paperwork for an MRI at a facility that catered to international patients who paid cash. He was nice, but I could tell he was nervous about helping me. While I waited for my test results, Ruby kept digging into the hospital's connections. She found out they had a contract with a medical device company called BioTrack Solutions that had been investigated twice by the FDA for unauthorized human trials. The company made long-term biomonitoring implants that were supposed to be for research purposes only. She sent me screenshots of their product catalog, and one device looked exactly like what I saw in the surgical video. I finally got Meg to answer her phone after leaving dozens of messages. I promised I'd protect her identity and never reveal she talked to me if she'd just tell me what she saw. She was crying as she explained that she watched them bag the device during my surgery and heard someone say it was from a batch that was supposed to be destroyed 3 years ago. She said the administrator who came into the OR seemed more worried about legal liability than my health. She told me she quit because she couldn't handle knowing they'd put these things in people without consent, and she was pretty sure I wasn't the only one. 3 nights in a row, I noticed the same dark sedan parked across from my apartment building. I started taking pictures with timestamps and keeping a log of when it showed up and left. On the 3rd night, I walked toward the car to confront whoever was inside, but it drove away before I got close. I managed to get a partial plate number and gave it to Ruby to see if she could trace it. Dr. Hans called me a week later with my test results. Most of my blood work was normal, but I had elevated inflammatory markers that suggested my body was reacting to a foreign object that wasn't there anymore. He also found unusual scar tissue patterns on the MRI that didn't match typical gallbladder surgery. The really scary part was when he said he found evidence of previous surgical alterations that happened before my gallbladder surgery. Someone had been inside me before, and I had no memory of any other operations. Ruby kept investigating the device serial number she'd found in some leaked documents. She discovered it was connected to a research unit that was a joint project between the hospital and a Department of Defense contractor studying long-term biological monitoring. The project was classified, but she found references to it in budget documents talking about tracking physiological data over extended periods. The implications made me sick to think about. A certified letter arrived at my apartment from the hospital's legal team. They claimed I'd stolen proprietary information by obtaining the surgical video and demanded I return all copies immediately or face criminal charges. The letterhead showed they'd hired Steinberg and Associates, one of the most aggressive law firms in the state that specialized in crushing people who went against big institutions. Ruby said this was actually good news because it meant they were scared of what I had. Ruby brought in someone named Polina Hester, who was a civil rights attorney with experience fighting hospitals over consent violations. She came to Ruby's apartment to meet me and review everything we'd gathered so far. She spent 3 hours going through the video, the documents Ruby had found, and all my medical records. She said we had a strong case, but we needed to be really strategic about how we moved forward because the hospital would try to bury us in legal proceedings. She explained that we couldn't just release the video publicly because they'd sue me into bankruptcy, but we could use it as leverage to force them to negotiate. Polina started working on our case the next morning and spent 3 days putting together formal complaints for the State Medical Board and the Office for Human Research Protections. She came to my apartment with a stack of papers and walked me through each document, showing me how she'd written everything to create a paper trail without mentioning the video directly. She said this would protect us legally while forcing them to respond officially. I signed where she pointed and watched her make copies of everything before she drove to the post office to send them certified mail with return receipts. 2 days later, Ruby called me excited because someone had sent her an anonymous email with a phone number and address for a family whose father died during routine surgery at the same hospital 2 years ago. The tipster said the family got a big settlement, but had to sign weird paperwork that mentioned research protocols and device recovery. Ruby drove us to their house in the suburbs, where a woman in her 50s answered the door and looked scared when we explained why we were there. She let us in after checking that nobody was watching from the street and took us to her kitchen where she had a box of medical papers on the table. Her hands shook as she pulled out billing statements from her father's surgery and pointed to codes that didn't match any normal procedures. I compared them to my own bills that I'd brought and found the exact same weird codes on mine. She started crying and said her father went in for hernia repair and died on the table, but nobody would explain what went wrong. The hospital paid them $2 million to stay quiet and made them sign papers about not discussing any research or devices found during the surgery. She said they took the money because they had no choice, but she never stopped wondering what really killed him. We stayed for 2 hours going through documents and taking pictures of everything that matched my case. On the drive home, my phone rang, and it was my landlord sounding nervous, saying he'd gotten a call from the city about code violations in my unit and needed to inspect it every week starting immediately. I knew this was harassment because my apartment was perfect, but I couldn't prove the connection. The inspections started 3 days later with him bringing a clipboard and taking pictures of every room while making up problems that didn't exist. Ruby started investigating the device company harder and found corporate filings showing 3 hospital board members owned stock in it worth millions. She also discovered the FDA had rejected their application for human trials twice before the company somehow got approval through a different department. She printed everything and brought it to Polina's office where we spent hours connecting the dots between the money and the unauthorized research. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Tariq saying he'd found something huge before leaving the country. He'd discovered the video server had special security set by the legal department instead of IT, which was weird, and there were 47 other surgical videos with the same containment protocol flag as mine. He sent screenshots showing patient ID numbers with dates going back 5 years and said he was destroying his equipment and flying to Berlin that night. The message deleted itself after I read it, but I'd already written down the important parts. Polina immediately drafted preservation letters and sent them to the hospital and my insurance company, legally requiring them to keep all records about my case and the other patients. She said if they destroyed anything now, it would be criminal obstruction, and explained this was a key move to protect evidence. 3 days passed before Meg finally called me back, crying again, but saying she'd thought about it and wanted to help. She agreed to give a sworn statement to Polina about what she saw during my surgery and why she quit her job. We met at Polina's office where Meg spent 4 hours describing everything while a court reporter typed it all up. She talked about seeing the device and hearing the administrator mention research protocols and watching them bag it like evidence instead of medical waste. She said she quit because she couldn't live with being part of something so wrong and was scared they'd come after her if she talked. Polina had her sign the affidavit and made multiple notarized copies that she locked in her office safe. The next morning, a courier delivered a letter from the hospital's lawyers requesting a meeting to discuss resolution. They offered to restore my full medical coverage immediately and pay substantial damages if I'd sign an NDA and return all copies of the video and any related documents. The letter said this was a one-time offer that would expire in 72 hours and included a draft agreement that was 20 pages long. Polina reviewed it and said the money was good, probably $3 million after taxes, but the NDA was so broad, I couldn't even tell my future doctors about the device. She said it was my choice, but we had leverage now and could probably get better terms if we pushed back. I spent 2 days thinking about it because the money would solve so many problems, but taking it meant staying silent while other people might have devices inside them. Dr. Ahans called and said I needed to come in for new tests because even though the device was gone, he wanted to monitor me for complications from whatever it had been doing to my body. I drove to his house where he did blood work and took new scans, then introduced me to a woman who specialized in therapy for people who'd been through medical abuse. She was gentle and understanding as she explained how this kind of violation affects people psychologically and said she'd seen similar cases of unauthorized research. We scheduled weekly sessions, and she gave me exercises to help with the nightmares and paranoia that had been getting worse since I saw the video. The next week brought a letter from the state medical board saying they'd gotten our complaint and would look into it. The official typed 2 pages about how these things take time, sometimes years, and there was no promise they'd do anything. Polina read it twice and said at least we'd made them write something down on paper that couldn't disappear. Ruby spent 3 straight days at her computer typing up everything we knew, leaving out names to protect people like Meg who were scared. She showed me draft after draft, cutting parts that might get us sued while keeping the worst stuff about what the hospital did. Her editor made her rewrite it 4 times before saying maybe they could print it if she found more proof. That's when the phone calls started coming in from other families who'd heard about us through patient groups online. A woman from 2 towns over said her husband got blacklisted after knee surgery and died 6 months later without any doctor helping him. Another family said their daughter couldn't get care after her appendix came out and they found something weird inside her. 17 different people called with the same kind of story about getting cut off from doctors after regular surgeries. Polina started writing down all their names and making files for each one, saying we had enough for a big lawsuit now. The hospital's lawyers called her office and asked for another meeting, this time with better terms written on fancy paper. They'd give me full medical coverage anywhere I wanted, help me find a new job, and pay me enough money to never work again if I wanted. The only catch was, I couldn't talk about the research stuff they'd been doing to people without permission. Polina pushed the papers across her desk and said it was my choice, but we had power now to ask for more. I took the papers home and stared at them for 3 days straight, knowing the money would fix everything, but also knowing other people were suffering. My hands shook every time I picked up the pen to sign, because taking their money meant staying quiet forever. Ruby called and said her editor finally said yes to printing the story if she didn't use my name or the hospital's name directly. She worked another 2 days making it perfect, showing how hospitals were doing research on people during regular surgeries without asking first. The story went online at midnight, and by morning had been shared 10,000 times with people demanding answers. The hospital put out a statement saying they were doing an internal quality review of their research department. 3 researchers got suspended while they investigated, though the hospital kept saying they didn't do anything wrong. Polina called it a win, because at least someone was being held responsible, even if they wouldn't admit guilt. I went back to her office and said I wanted to change the deal, so I could talk to government investigators about what happened. She spent 6 hours on the phone with their lawyers working out new terms that let me help with official investigations, but not talk to reporters. The compromise meant I'd get my medical care back and enough money to live on, while still helping catch the people who did this. 2 weeks later, a man in a suit from the state investigation office came to take my testimony about everything. He wrote down every word I said about the device and the video, and how they'd blocked me from getting help. He said they were taking this seriously, and more investigators would be coming to look at the hospital's files. My new insurance card came in the mail with a special note saying I could see any doctor who took cash patients outside the normal network. Dr. Hans signed the papers to be my main doctor and set up monthly checkups to watch for any problems from the device. The relief of having real medical care again made me sleep through the night for the first time in months. Ruby's story kept spreading online, and more reporters started digging into similar cases at other hospitals around the country. The hospital's CEO went on TV, saying they were committed to patient safety and would cooperate with all investigations. Behind the scenes, Polina heard they were destroying old research files and moving money to offshore accounts before investigators could find it. More families kept calling us with their stories, and we started a private online group to share information and support each other. Some had lost loved ones who couldn't get treatment, while others were still fighting to get basic medical care after being blacklisted. The state investigation team came back 3 more times to ask questions and look at the evidence we'd collected from everyone. They said criminal charges might be possible, but it would take months of work to build a strong case. Polina kept filing papers with the court to preserve evidence and stop the hospital from hiding what they'd done to us. Every small victory felt huge after months of being powerless against the whole medical system working together. The settlement money finally came through, and I could pay back everyone who'd helped me when I had nothing left. Dr. Hans ran new tests that showed my body was healing well, even though we'd never know exactly what that device had been doing inside me. Ruby won an award for her reporting and used her speech to talk about the brave people who risked everything to expose the truth. The hospital quietly settled with 6 more families while denying any wrongdoing in official statements to the press. Each day got a little easier, knowing I wasn't alone anymore, and that people were finally listening to what happened to us. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a German number I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw it was Tariq, saying he made it to Berlin, and wasn't coming back until the statute of limitations ran out on whatever charges they might try to pin on him for getting that video. He typed that exposing what they did was worth having to leave everything behind and start over in a country where nobody knew him. The next morning, Ruby texted me that the FDA had sent a warning letter to the device company, demanding they explain why their products were being used in ways they weren't approved for. It wasn't a recall or anything that strong, but it meant the company had to tell the truth about what they'd been doing with those implants, or face bigger penalties. Ruby said her sources told her the company was scrambling to blame individual doctors, instead of admitting they knew what was happening. A few days later, Meg sent me a message through the encrypted app, saying she'd gotten a job at a small clinic 3 states away, where nobody knew about what happened at our hospital. She was still having bad dreams about being in that operating room and seeing them pull that thing out of me, but at least she could work again without people asking questions. She said talking to me helped her deal with the guilt of not speaking up sooner when she knew something was wrong. 3 months after Ruby's story went viral, I was watching the news when they announced Congress was going to hold hearings about medical research being done without patients knowing about it. Ruby called me right after to say they wanted her to testify about her investigation and show them all the evidence we'd collected from the different families. The coverage was going national now, with major networks picking up the story and sending reporters to interview anyone who'd talk about what the hospital had done. That same week, the hospital announced their CEO was leaving to pursue other opportunities, which everyone knew meant the board forced him out to try to save face. 3 board members also stepped down without any big announcements, just quiet resignations filed with the state. The new people they brought in kept talking about transparency and reform, but I didn't believe they'd really change anything unless someone made them. I got a letter in the mail from someone in Ohio who'd had their appendix out at a hospital that worked with the same device company. They wrote that they'd been sick for years, with weird symptoms no doctor could explain, until they read about what happened to me and realized they might have one of those things inside them too. They thanked me for speaking up, because now they finally knew why they'd been so sick and could try to get help, even though most doctors still didn't believe them. Knowing I'd helped even one person understand what was wrong with them made all the fear and isolation I'd gone through feel like it meant something. Polina called to tell me she was working with 17 other people who'd been through the same thing to get settlements like mine, with guarantees they'd get medical care and regular checkups to watch for problems. The hospital's insurance company was freaking out about having to pay all these claims and forced the hospital to completely shut down the implant program so they wouldn't have to pay for more victims later. Dr. Hans had me come in for new scans and blood work to check how I was doing 6 months after they took that thing out of me. He showed me the images on his computer and pointed out how the inflammation markers were way down and there weren't any signs of other devices or damage from whatever that thing had been doing. My body was finally healing from all the stress that device had put on my organs and immune system for who knows how long. The placement agency I'd been working with found me a job at a company that didn't do deep background checks, just basic stuff to make sure I wasn't a criminal. I started as a temp doing data entry, but they liked my work and offered me a full-time position after 2 months. Having a regular paycheck again and being able to pay my bills without worrying felt amazing after everything I'd lost. Going to work every morning and doing normal, boring office stuff was exactly what I needed to feel like a regular person again, instead of some medical experiment gone wrong. Ruby called to tell me she'd won a big journalism award for her investigation into the hospital and the device company. She was going to use her acceptance speech to talk about how brave we all were for risking everything to tell the truth about what happened to us. She kept saying she couldn't have done it without people like me and Meg being willing to share our stories, even when we were scared of what might happen. The award came with money that Ruby said she was donating to a fund for people who couldn't afford lawyers to fight hospitals that had hurt them. More reporters kept calling, wanting to interview me, but I stuck to my settlement agreement and only talked to government investigators who were protected by whistleblower laws. The investigators must have been busy because 3 weeks later, the device company announced they were filing for bankruptcy after getting hit with massive regulatory fines and 17 different lawsuits from victims. The executives walked away without any criminal charges, which made me want to punch a wall, but at least their company was dead, and they couldn't plant any more devices in people. A year after my surgery, I was running an unofficial network to help other victims find doctors who would actually see them. We had a whole system worked out with cash-only clinics and doctors like Hans who weren't afraid of the hospital's blacklists. I kept a spreadsheet with over 40 names of people who'd been cut off from medical care after routine surgeries and connected them with providers who would help. My phone buzzed one morning with a message from Meg saying she was getting married next month and hadn't had nightmares in 6 weeks. She wrote that speaking up about what happened gave her back some control and thanked me for being brave enough to go first, even though we'd never actually met in person. The congressional hearings dragged on for months, but finally resulted in something called the Patient Protection Act that required hospitals to report any research complications within 24 hours and get real consent for any experimental procedures. Ruby called me laughing about how they should have named it after me, since my case started the whole investigation. Hans asked me to come by his office one afternoon to meet his daughter, who was opening a clinic for people the medical system had failed. She explained how she wanted to hire someone who understood what victims went through to help them navigate getting proper care, and asked if I'd be interested in the position. The pay wasn't great, but it came with full benefits, and most importantly, meant I could turn my nightmare into something useful for other people. I started the next Monday and spent my days calling insurance companies, finding specialists, and walking scared people through their options when the regular system had abandoned them. Every person we got proper treatment for felt like scoring a point against the hospitals and companies that thought they could use us as lab rats. 2 years after they found that device inside me, I had a real job, actual health insurance, and a whole network of survivors who understood exactly what we'd been through. The fear of what they'd done to me would pop up sometimes when I felt a weird pain or got sick, but it didn't run my life anymore. My story didn't end with the bad guys in jail or millions in settlement money, but with something more important. We built a community of people who refused to stay silent, found doctors who chose doing the right thing over protecting institutions, and proved that even massive hospital systems had to change when enough people stood up together and said no more. And that's it for today. Nothing fancy, just the story as it happened. Thanks for hanging out with me. It always feels like a chill catch-up. Come back whenever you feel like it. No pressure.